I mentioned earlier that one of the extraordinary things about Big River, and for that matter any production done by Deaf West, is that it's done in two languages simultaneously, in English and in American Sign Language. And I noticed in the program that there are 4 people whose credits are sign masters for Big River, and I wanted to ask to explain what that actually means. It obviously is more than just the person who translated the show, but what are the sign masters, and who wants to answer that question?
Well, I'm not equipped to give you the best answer, but from my point of view, I can tell you that they are the unsung heroes of this. They are as responsible as anybody for any success that this show is having. Bill, you're probably the appropriate person.
Well, I think we should hear from the hearing and deaf actors too, but what I would add to that is that from my perspective, definitely there has been a progression, I think, of when the hearing and the deaf cultures came together. The sign translations had to become more fine-tuned towards bringing all of that together. And I think one of the most meaningful ways that it winds up, the outcome winds up being that what we hear as a hearing audience and what the deaf actor is saying and emoting and meaning is exactly on the same page. And that becomes sort of, I think, the magic for an audience member who in some ways has a similar path that Huck and Jim have, where they start out from perspectives of cultures that don't really get each other. There's a divide that they're reaching across. And I think the same thing happens between the people on stage and the people in the audience who are predominantly hearing, where they start, by the end of the show, they are watching Ty, and they absolutely are feeling and being, they're being affected by this guy who's communicating to them in a language that's absolutely foreign, but they can tell that what he's saying is exactly what they're hearing. And that is only the result of meticulous translation, so that the idioms and the humor and the class, he's the least educated and smartest guy up there, and that's reflected in the sign language as much as it is in how you hear it. So there's just a lot of intricate stuff that a lot of time goes into, and I think it's definitely, the translations are a big part of what the engine of this is.
I don't think people...
And which
Go ahead,
leads
Ty.
me to comment that the hearing audience watches me sign, and they maybe don't understand sign language, and yet they see what I'm saying. And it's on the same lines as to what is being spoken. And that goes directly to the role of the translator, the team of 4. They had to do a lot of investigating of finding the meaning of the English that's in the script, because the script was written originally in English, so that's pretty much frozen. We had to follow the script. And then we had to analyze what's the meaning of each line, which sometimes we could have spent an hour, 2 hours, even 3 hours on figuring out one little line. I mean, Dan knows. Dan knows we spent so much time together. But it was great because we wanted to find equivalents. We wanted translations that would augment both the English and the ASL, that would have a synergistic effect on both languages. And in order to add to that, the next step after finding the meaning is, what sign do you use specifically? There might be one sign that just is too modern for the era in which the show's performed in. So we had to be very careful in selecting our signs. And perhaps one sign that we selected wouldn't match the character. So there were a lot of intricacies involved in the task of the ASL masters. And actually, the ASL masters is a new concept in our theater. I think it only began a few years ago. Previous to that, we would never have an ASL master. The actor would translate their own script. One person would pick one sign, and maybe we'd teach somebody else the sign, but there was no overall coordination. So a few years ago, we started to recognize the need for an ASL master, and that's one reason that Big River is so beautiful and that everyone has commented and applauded us for that. It's gorgeous.